Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. Don't tell me not to live, just sit and putter. I've got no rhythm. Today I'm going to do a short review and a review. So a review of an evening that I spent in the company of this year's Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction, Joshua Cohen, and a review of his book, The Netanyahus, for which he was just awarded the Pulitzer Prize. So this is already now a couple of months ago. It was at the Jerusalem International Writers Festival, which we try and go to every year. They've had a couple of years off because of Corona, and this year they were back with I guess maybe back to sort of 60% live events. And there's always one or two that I try and go to. And this year, with opening evening was Olga Tokarczuk. That was great. I have some footage of that. Maybe I'll do that when I eventually get around to reading and reviewing the books of Jacob. And then we went back another night to see Joshua Cohen. And then at the same time that Joshua Cohen was talking, so I missed this talk, was Rutu Mordan, the cartoonist. And so after I after I queued up to get Joshua Cohen to sign my book, I then ran over to where Rutu Mordan had just finished her talk, and she signed her latest book for me as well. But what I've got here, so we're going to talk about the Netanyahus, which I bought that night. I hadn't read yet when I heard him speak. But what I'll play now is the footage of him describing his book, I think. So this is Joshua Cohen at the Jerusalem International Writers Festival talking about what the Netanyahus is.
I'm not I think that maybe, I don't know, I feel like we should explain maybe what the book is about a little bit.
Yes.
A little bit, okay, first. So it's about 200 pages long. No, it's about a meeting between a fictional professor of taxation studies, a Jew born in the Bronx, who's really been thrust into American life, out into Western New York, in the woods, where he teaches at a pretty bad college. And he's asked by the head of the history department if he would take around a candidate for a job interview. And he doesn't understand why he's being asked, because this guy is a specialist in American history and American taxation policy, something very exciting. And he's being asked to chaperone this man who is who's up for a job, who's being considered for a job in medieval European history. And when he says, why? He says, well, you're a Jew.
You should say that it takes place in the, not now. It's
no, this is 1959, 1960. Yeah. And so...
And now I guess I'll tell you a little bit about what I thought about it. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was terrific. And I came to it with a sense that I might not think it was so terrific. I'd previously read Cohen's last novel, which was Moving Kings. I think there are a couple of books before this, at least one very big one. And so I read Moving Kings. I got this lovely Fitzcarraldo edition. And this is about a couple of Israelis who have finished their conscripted time in the army in Israel and move out to New York, where they work with a relative of theirs in the moving businesses, helping people move apartments. A model which is, I understand, fairly familiar. If you're in New York, your moving company are going to be Israelis. That's, I think, a thing. And it's about them and working through the experience they've had in the army, and then getting away from that and seeing, working out how they want to live and choosing a different way of experiencing the world. So I'm an Israeli, but I never served in the army, so I'm sort of I've got one foot in each of these worlds. So I don't quite understand what the pressures are, but I have children who were all conscripted and served. Their story to tell, not mine. So my experience, this is as an outsider looking in. I'm familiar with some of the terms, like there's a lot of inside jargon, army slang, which when you're in the army or when you're around people who've been in the army, you find there's a lot of that talk, a lot of acronyms, a lot of just things which are normal standard behavior or part of the experience of being around the army seeps into everyday conversation. And I felt that seemed really authentic in Moving Kings. Clearly, Cohen has some kind of insider. He's not just a Jewish American. He has some strong link to Israel. He had some empathy and some understanding of what it is to be an Israeli, which is not the same as being a Jewish American. I want to make those two things very clear. Not every Jew around the world, wherever they are and wherever they find themselves, knows anything at all about what it is to be an Israeli, or to serve in the army, or to live in this crazy country with a crazy government, of which more politics in a second. So I thought this was impressively authentic on that experience on the Israeli side, or at least my view of what that is. But the rest of it felt it didn't feel fully formed. And this was not his first novel, but I guess I was a little disappointed by it. So I came to the Netanyahus. I saw it when it was first announced. And then it won, so I know a lot of people were surprised when it won the Pulitzer, but it had previously won, in January this year, it won the J.J. Greenberg Prize for Fiction from the American Jewish Book Council, not a prize that I gather is fairly followed on BookTube. I happen to know the family of the late J.J. Greenberg, so it's something I sort of pay attention to. I saw it come up there, but it's a book of Jewish interest, of Israel interest, particularly, when you call a book The Netanyahus, and this is the American paperback edition from the New York Review of Books, put it down in paperback, so I don't know if there was a hardback edition in America. I think in the UK it's still in the Fitzcarraldo. You can buy this in the Fitzcarraldo. They didn't have those, so I bought this at the book at the Writers' Festival, and this is what they had, and I was happy to pick it up. I think it's a nice edition. I like the NYRB; they do sort of really solid covers and things. Anyway, so I came to this. I'd seen the title, and perhaps wasn't rushing out to read it because I didn't have a great experience with Moving Kings. Then it won the Pulitzer Prize. So before it won the Pulitzer Prize, it was announced that Joshua Cohen was going to be at the Writers' Festival, so I'd already booked to see him there, figuring that I would pick up a copy while I was there. And then he won the Pulitzer Prize, and then I already had tickets to see him. Felt like I was, some kind of brilliant Nostradamus. Obviously not. So I know there was some surprise, when the Pulitzer was announced, at least on BookTube. It seemed like the book had come out of left field, but it had been on several people's radar. Some people had read it long before me. Bob the Booker, I think, read this around about that time, either before or after it won the Pulitzer, and did a review of it. And I only read it after I met Joshua Cohen. I say I really, really like this. We've got a stand-in for Harold Bloom. I think the whole story originates with this anecdote that Harold Bloom, Joshua Cohen claims Harold Bloom told him that when he was a young professor in college, Benzion Netanyahu turned up to interview for a professorship at that college, and Harold Bloom was an American Jew, and the powers that be decided, oh, you're a Jew, he's a Jew, you should be the one to show him around. Never really understanding who Benzion Netanyahu was, and perhaps even at that time we didn't quite have an idea of who he was. We know him now as the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, and the late Yoni Netanyahu, and Ido, who's also mentioned here. But the boys show up as child characters later in the book. But let's be clear about this. The book is called The Netanyahus. It's not about the Netanyahus. It's a bit of misdirection, and one that I think Joshua Cohen is gleefully playing up. He's called the book The Netanyahus. I think that's going to pop it up on people's radar. It's going to make people think, oh, really? This is about Benjamin Netanyahu's family? It's about his father, who is a scholar in exile, a historian, a fierce Zionist at a time when Zionism was perhaps less reviled around the world than it is in some places now. But even then, he was a certain kind of Zionist. He was, even in his time, a right-wing Zionist at a time when Israel was a country founded on socialist principles and run by successive socialist governments. So he was a man exiled from Israel because of his sort of right-wing beliefs and his, I won't say violent beliefs, but certainly out of step with where Israel was at this time. This is the end of the 1950s, start of the 1960s. He's in America trying to earn a living and provide for his family and these three boisterous young men, one of whom grows up to be the real life character that we know as Benjamin or Bibi Netanyahu. As I say, the Netanyahus only show up maybe halfway, 2/3 of the way through the book. The rest of the book is about this character, this stand-in for Harold Bloom, who in the book is called Reuben Blum, and it's less about Zionism or the Netanyahus or Israel or right-wing Zionism or anything to do with that political side of things, and much more about being an assimilated Jew outside of, let's say, New York or Los Angeles, the two, or even Chicago, the major Jewish centers in America in the late 50s. This is in a little college, maybe upstate New York, and Bloom may be the only Jew around, and finding his place as an outsider trying to break into sort of very waspy academia. His wife and his daughter, all of them trying to find their place and not be ashamed of who they are, but not feeling particularly proud or wanting to represent anything other than themselves. And so the story starts with Reuben Bloom not particularly championing or talking about his Judaism, but still being singled out by the dean and said, well, this chap is coming over, he's Israeli, obviously you need to be the one to show him round. So the book is a meditation on that, the assimilated, the diaspora Jew, what one's relationship is, what one's responsibility is towards faith of your parents or family or people on the other side of the world. And it's something that I think American Jewish authors have been wrestling with for as long as we know, Saul Bellow and Philip Roth and Malamud, and the great history of mid-century American Jewish authors have been wrestling with their identity and their Jewishness, their status as outsiders. If they try too hard, they look like they're trying to break into something that they're not really part of. If they but are they considered traitors by the generations that come before them? This whole I think someone more versed in Yiddish would say "nicht here, nicht there," neither one nor the other. I don't know if that's Yiddish, but that's a kind of expression that someone maybe it's German expression I've heard people say, neither one thing nor the other. And that's the story. This is what we got. The Netanyahus are a distraction. They're a sideshow in this book named for them. And when they turn up, the comedy gets dialed up. Benzion is an angry character, a slightly ridiculous character, and yet the contrast between this angry Israeli Jew and the demands that he makes and the expectations he has from life, from this college where he's applying for a job, where he's asking them for something, the contrast between his personality and his demands and the way he relates to life, and this nebbish, I don't know if you think, this quiet, trying to fit in, trying to make his own way in life, assimilated American Jew in this very waspy background. That contrast is delicious and noted and very clear. There are a number of set pieces in this which are laugh out loud funny. We have Bloom's daughter who is desperate for a nose job because she's ashamed of the way she looks and how it telegraphs her ethnicity to others, or in her opinion, it telegraphs her ethnicity in ways that she would rather hide, begging her parents to allow her to get cosmetic surgery on her nose, and then taking extreme measures when they don't, is just an astonishing and funny and brutal set piece. And then towards the end, there are we get into slapstick levels of comedy with the wild animal Netanyahu boys, one of whom we know turns out to be the crook and iconoclast Benjamin Netanyahu, and long-time Prime Minister of Israel, and God help us, maybe future Prime Minister of Israel. and it's just genuinely hilarious and a fantastic climax to the whole thing. This was just a joy for me from start to finish, from the slow times, from the set pieces to the genuine comedy. And I'm not a fan of comic writing. I struggle with things that set out to be deliberately funny. I was blindsided by this because Moving King's not so funny and to me not successful, but this is absolutely worth your time. You know, is it a worthy winner? The Pulitzer, I don't really know what the parameters are for that, but I thought this was a fantastic book, and I'm pleased it surfaced. What it tells me, you know, so I met Joshua Cohen. I think I heard him outside before he came into the thing, conversing quite fluently in Hebrew. So although he is an American Jew, I think his relationship to the Hebrew, to spoken Israeli Hebrew, was close enough that he was able to have conversations, and he gave the talk in English, as you've seen, and you see again. He signed the book for me when I went up to him afterwards. He wrote his name and the date, and actually wrote Yerushalayim, which is the Hebrew. This is Hebrew script. So this is something you've only learned. This is not the biblical Hebrew print that is used for that a typewriter would put out. That is the handwritten script that it's not very interesting. But anyway, he wrote Yerushalayim in Hebrew, Jerusalem in Hebrew. So again, familiar with it. He's not just an American Jew observing. He seems to have some kind of link and some kind of affinity, and there's an authentic side to his relationship to Israel. And I think on that point, I'll play you a little clip where he talks about and shows some sympathy for Benzion Netanyahu, and he's being not facetious exactly, but he's being devil's advocate here. Politically, he is much further to the left, as far away from Benzion and Benjamin Netanyahu as I think it's possible to imagine. Like, he doesn't care about them. He was asked several times, you know, what have they read the book? Do we know if Netanyahu's read the book? Blah blah. And he had no interest in that. Couldn't care less whether they have read the book. It's not really about them. He certainly doesn't sympathize with them politically. But in talking to the crowd, he expressed some admiration for Benzion Netanyahu, Bibi's father, even though he was right-wing Jabotinskyite and not at all, I think, of the same politics as Joshua Cohen. But he talks about the parts of it that were admirable about this man who is forced into academia when really he'd rather be fighting. So I'll play that clip now.
No one is more beautifully rude to people than like Israeli cab drivers, right? But then when you read it in a book, it's like offensive. It's just, he's just straight. Yeah, he's straight ahead. And I think that one of the things that I really wanted to point out in the book was this distinction that he really suffered from. Beyond this, living in this kind of hothouse of resentment, and he is a person, he's in academia, which is, at least notionally, is a world that has certain standards for research. There's peer review, there's the idea that facts must be cross-checked, and there's a consensus that comes after a few generations of research. And he's sitting there, he's a historian who has an ideology, so that's already complicated the academic notion. But he's also someone whose politics have, at different times, endorsed violence. And so he, what is an academic? It's like, those who can't do teach, right? You go and you hide behind the walls and you teach and you talk to other people who are interested in book learning while the revolutions go on outside. And I think he always felt this enormous anxiety between being somebody who was having colleagues who were content with the cold and apolitical analysis of information, and his commitments and Jabotinskyite desires to change the world. And as a novelist, where every couple months I get an invitation, would you like to teach at this university? And no, I'd like to kill all of you. I don't want to teach at a university. I want shit to mean something. I want people to feel. I want things to change. I want us all to live together on a cloud, right? I don't want to be on a committee. I'm very sympathetic to him.
So To my mind, a great book, and I think part of a trend which I've noticed recently amongst more contemporary Jewish American authors, that they're not just writing about being Jews and being outsiders in American society in the way that, say, Saul Bellow mastered. I think what they are doing is wrestling with that, with what Israel means to modern American Jews. And I've seen it in a couple of books. Nathan Englander, who I think lived here for some time and has written a whole bunch of books, starting with, his first collection was called, For the Relief of Unbearable Urges. Read that many years ago, and I've read his What We Talk About. I'm looking at it because they're right over here under E for Englander. And then this was a book he put out recently, a couple of years ago, called Kaddish.com, which is set in Israel and deals with it talks very clear, this is a man who knows Israeli society, not just being a Jew in America. Nicole Krauss's last novel, I believe, Forest Dark, is also set very heavily in Israel and is about Kafka and how his papers ended up in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and the relation. Also a very Israeli book, and I know she too has spent time here. I met her. I've got she signed this for me because I didn't have the book with me when last time we saw her, also at the International Writers Festival. And then John the Saffron Fir, who was previously married to Nicole Krauss, his book Here I Am, which is a direct reference to the Bible and Abraham's response to God, Hineni, Here I Am, and again a very Israeli novel. Set in America, but there are the characters' cousins who come over from Israel. They get stuck there. They can't get back to Israel, and there's a war going on in Israel, and really wrestling with the identity of the American Jew and his relationship to this weird entity that happens to be the country I live in, of Israel. So I found that fascinating. I asked Joshua Cohen, I said when I read Moving Kings, I felt it was kind of in conversation with this, because it was American Jews wrestling with what it means to be an Israeli. I don't think he was very pleased with that suggestion. He said, well, I think my book came out first. I wasn't trying to, whatever. Anyway, he bristled a little bit at my trying to make a comparison with his earlier novel and Saffron Fir. Probably, if I think about it, the person who started this all off is the great master of 20th century American literature, of 20th century Jewish American literature, Philip Roth. This is I think this is the first Roth I read after Porno's Complaint. I think this was went way back into Roth, and then we had that fantastic late career run of American Pastoral and Human Stain and all those books, and Marriage, something about whatever it was. This is Operation Shylock, which is a kind of metafiction. I think Philip Roth is a character in this, and he meets somebody who is in Israel, calling himself Philip Roth, pretending to be Philip Roth. And again, not just Jewish American identity, but became possible to talk about Israel with some of its imperfections and idiosyncrasies as well. So I think there's something going on amongst American Jewish writers and how they are dealing with and relating to and turning towards Israel and wondering what this is and what the relationship of the diaspora is to Israeli Jews. Are we still one people, or are these two different things going in different directions? And I find, as an immigrant to Israel, although not from the American Jewish background, I guess that's something I find kind of interesting. I don't know if you do, but just to say, Joshua Cohen's The Netanyahus, absolutely loved it, highly recommend it, and that's all. Bye.